that I waited for now is what I was created for now. I'm gonna let you know what I'm feeling now. I must be quite emphatical. I'm feeling plain ecstatical. Wow. I might just float right up to the ceiling. The joy inside me, the smile you see, it's for one reason alone. The time and place where I want to be is holy hot damn, right where I am now. The past is too historical now. The future needs an oracle now. Is when you feel euphorical. Trust me, your crowning achievement, your greatest prize will come on the day that you realize the moment you're living for. Wow, is now.
Hello, everyone. I'm Britt Elders. I'm sitting in for Shirley. She's still up in Canada filming the Disney movie. She's having a blast, and they should be wrapping pretty quickly. I'm sure she'll be back as soon as she can be. Tonight, we have a fascinating guest. Gerard Aartsen is a student of the Ageless Wisdom teachings, and he's been a student of those teachings for over 35 years. He's a prolific writer, writes for Share magazine, which is really fabulous. If you haven't seen it, you should get it. And he lectures around the world about what he's learned in the last 35 years. He has a Master of Education degree, which in some people's thoughts is contrary to his passion. But both Shirley and I find this very, very refreshing. Gerard, welcome to IE Radio. It is a pleasure to finally speak with you, and you're in the Netherlands, right?
I am in the Netherlands, yes, and thank you very much for having me on the show.
Okay, we're just gonna go all over the place because we have so much to talk about. And this is a compliment, even though it may not sound like it, but it is a compliment to you. You are old school ufology, which I feel is tremendous of value in raising the public's awareness. And I say that because you don't play in fear, as so many researchers, contactees, and experiencers do today. I think maybe we need to start with what the Ageless Wisdom teachings are all about. And maybe that can set the tone for everything we talk about today.
Yes, I think that's a good starting point, actually. And perhaps it's good to say that when you speak of old school ufology, you mean I started out my research with the original contactees of the 1950s. And that is exactly the point where I found the connection with my own background as a student of the Ageless Wisdom, because the Ageless Wisdom teaching is really about the evolution of consciousness in whatever form life takes. We find consciousness according to these teachings,
right.
And they've been placed more in the perception, in the awareness of the general public since the late 19th century, starting with Madame Blavatsky.
Yes.
And her major books, Isis Unveiled and The Secret Doctrine. These works were elaborated on extensively by Alice Ann Bailey, who also worked for one of what are called the Masters of Wisdom, who are the guides and mentors of humanity and have actually evolved out of the human kingdom. If we look at the expression of life on this planet, starting with the mineral kingdom, out of which the vegetable kingdom evolved, and out of that the animal kingdom evolved, and the human kingdom as a result of the animal kingdom. The evolution of consciousness doesn't stop with the human kingdom, and indeed over the millennia, the millions of years actually, that the history of the evolution of the human race on this planet has taken, the spiritual kingdom has evolved. And the spiritual kingdom consists of the masters and initiates of wisdom. And when we say master of wisdom, we are not talking about master in the sense of authority, but or control or rule, other than control over their own lower nature, control over the laws of nature, because they've learned to live according to the laws of life, and thereby have become able to express their divine nature on the physical plane, as we are in the process of doing, we, the rest of humanity. So that is my background as a student of the Ageless Wisdom teaching. And if we look now at the work, the information, and the accounts of the original contactees of the 1950s, we see that their contacts, their extraterrestrial contacts, were speaking of exactly the same process of evolution of consciousness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they were. I've studied Adamski quite a bit because one of the cases my husband and I were involved with in Switzerland, one of the researchers in Switzerland actually did some work with Adamski. And that was quite enlightening. And I know that you refer to his work quite a bit. What do you find so fascinating about what Adamski has to share?
Well, first of all, the fact that he was the most outspoken, perhaps, and also the most elaborate on this aspect, this very aspect of the subject of extraterrestrial visitation, the evolution of consciousness in all his books, but especially inside spaceships. And perhaps less well known to most people would be his first book, Wisdom of the Masters of the Far East, which he published in 1936, before he became known for his work with the flying saucers and then the visitors from space.
Right.
And in that booklet, Wisdom of the Masters of the Far East, he very eloquently and very succinctly put forward the basic notions of what has become known as the Ageless Wisdom. And when I first found out about that booklet and read it, I made it clicked with me, his work, and put it in a far wider context than just one of the contactees who was writing about his experiences.
Right.
Also, for me, Adamski, I think, was the bravest of all the contactees. He was also the most maligned. His character has been defamed. All of the contactees have been ridiculed to the point where most people think they're best left forgotten. As a result of the disinformation campaign that started in the 1950s to do precisely that, because the governments and the military needed the public support in their nuclear arms race and conventional arms race with the Soviets.
Right.
And here were these contactees, and many of them were in the United States because the U.S. was such a major player in that conflict, but they were in other countries as well, saying that there were these people from space that they spoke with who told us that the only way we can solve our problems on this planet is through international cooperation.
Right.
And to get rid of nuclear arms and nuclear or the fission technology for nuclear energy. And that, of course, didn't fit the perception and the paradigm along which the governments were working at the time.
Well, it's much easier, and this is what I was referring to earlier. It's much easier to control the masses through fear than it is through open exchange and dialogue. It's more beneficial, obviously, to have the
Mm.
conversation, but the governments around the world, all of them, work from a basis of keep the public off center, and you have better control. Um, with Adamski's work, now he's obviously faced a lot of criticism. I know several people personally that actually worked with him, that spent time with him, that found him to be nothing but uh, real. I mean, from the heart, kind of real.
Mm.
How can, and very different, I might add, from contactees or experiencers today, how can we compare today to what was going on in the 50s when we were in the middle of a global Cold War where there was so much angst among all the population? Today, we're walking into those same footsteps. However, because communications have increased so readily and everything is instantaneous, I think there is a little less fear. How can we compare the experiencers today versus the people of Adamski's time? Can we?
Or if we are talking of experiencers and modern day contactees, I think we need to be careful because we've had this whole period, or starting with the disinformation campaign, roughly around the mid 1950s, that was meant exactly to cause fear and confusion among the public. And everything that has come since that the start of that campaign to disinform the public must be approached with the greatest caution, because we know, and all the serious researchers agree, that there have been and are huge black budgets that are used towards this end. And researchers have documented instances of secret government operatives or even whole agencies involved in setting up experiences for people, maybe through drugs or through hypnosis. I have no doubt that the visitors from space have continued on an individual basis their contact with people on Earth. And many of them even live and work here among us, unrecognized. But at the same time, because of that whole climate of confusion and fear, a lot of speculation has risen up. And, people have had memories implanted, may have memories confused. And so the best thing for me as a researcher was to find the correspondences in the accounts of the contactees that spoke out and wrote about their experiences before the start of the disinformation campaign, find corroborations for their experiences in even now in the latest scientific insights or in universal religious notions, in especially the ageless wisdom teaching, my own background. And based on that synthesis of findings, using that as a touchstone to see in how far people's experiences nowadays stand up against that kind of scrutiny. But I mean, I am not one to readily accept anybody's claim that they were contacted or abducted or anything like that.
Right. I absolutely understand that. I mean, my background is in investigation, and you don't take anyone's word for it. You get out there and you dig and you get your hands dirty and you find out what's real and what isn't real. And then you put it out there and you let people make a decision, because ultimately that's where the decision comes from, each individual. And it has to be from their knowledge base. So the more information you can provide, the better. What happened with all of this truly wonderful information that the contactees of that time period had to share? Why did we turn our backs on it? Why did we not pay more attention to what was actually being said by people like Adamski? And we're going to get into the Yarger contacts here in a little bit, because I was there at the original meeting with Kim and Wendell Stevens. My husband and I were present. We had long conversations with Mr. Beers. So I want to talk about that a little later. But why have we lost this information? Why do we not pay attention to it now?
Well, I think, like I said, the deliberate efforts of governments to confuse and scare the public about the visitors from space, because it wasn't in the government's and the vested interest that the public would take it seriously and look into the possibility of international cooperation, lasting peace, safe energy sources, and because of that, there was a deliberate effort to ridicule them, to defame them, the original contactees, and from that whole period, massive speculation resulted. So now everybody says, well, nobody knows the truth. And to come back to the point you were just making, everybody's experience is subjective.
Yes.
And we can only respect that. And in order to see if anybody's experience is of value for others, we need to see if there are correspondences, if there is something that in the experience that resonates with other people's experiences and with the Aces wisdom teachings, etc. If it goes beyond the strictly subjective state.
Yeah, and if it goes beyond the story, as an investigator, you have to look at things that have documentation, hard evidence behind them.
Exactly.
If that hard evidence exists, if there are things that cannot be easily dissuade in any manner, then I think it's important that we open up to this. And I've got to say, most people don't realize these contactees really, in many instances, put their life on the line to stand up for what they believed in.
Yes.
Unfortunately, that part of the story rarely gets out. Many people are not aware of the problems that many contactees have faced throughout the years. No. And understandably, being poo-pooed by governments or whomever, that's one thing. But the other thing is when they are actually threatened, which many of them were.
Yes, and actually, when you look at their cases, they turn out to be people with characters of the highest integrity, because many of them were intimidated. Yeah. And they were offered large sums of money so that they would either withdraw their stories, not speak about it anymore, or tell people, no, I was just making it up, it was science fiction or whatever. And I know of none of these people who have actually done that. Some may have been intimidated into silence, but none of them has actually withdrawn their stories once they were published. So they were people of the highest integrity.
Very, very true. You know Dan Fry, I'm sure.
Yes, I've read his book, yes.
Yes, yeah. He was one of the ones that went through quite a bit of turmoil in his personal life because of his views. Mm-hmm. There are just so many, and this information is being lost, which is why I think it's so important that your books have come out and your knowledge base is being shared now. Why do you think, besides the government fear aspect, all right, and all that is held there, and the lack of disclosure from governments to the public, things like that. Are there other reasons that the early messages of the early contactees are being ignored now?
Yes, I think people are far too preoccupied with surviving, making a living, having grown up in this society where competition is a necessity. We have to compete to make a living. We have to compete even for the lowest salaries nowadays. We have to compete for the basic necessities of life. And that makes, of course, greed a virtue, because the more you have, the more you manage to acquire, the easier it is to compete. And that's how we see, as a result, the massive inequality in the world. In every country nowadays, we have very few people who are immensely rich, and the large majority who have struggled to get by, let alone to get ahead. And we see this in every country, and that is a result of the commercialization of life, the market forces that have taken over since the coming to power of the Reagan administration in the US in 1980, and a year earlier the Thatcher administration in the UK. And that is when businesses, corporations really manage to convince politicians of actually all colors, from left to right eventually, the other way around, from right to left, but including social democrat leaders and parties in Western Europe. That the best democracy would be guaranteed by leaving everything to the markets, because of the principle of supply and demand, forgetting that people with a lot of money to start with, there's never been a level playing field, of course, in the field of economics, because some people start out with a lot more money and a lot more possibilities than most people, and they were able to acquire much more, and to the point where we have really returned to what amounts to slavery, economic slavery on a mass scale that we haven't seen in thousands of years. In an environment like that, it is really difficult for people to pay serious attention to these fundamental issues of life, the evolution of consciousness. How do we overcome our separation, our divisions? We've come out of this massive conditioning of left and right and conservatives and progressives. And for most of us, the conditioning weighs heaviest. So, it's only now that you see slowly the younger people, or those who are young at heart, that are able to look beyond those old school divisions and are looking for real solutions. But our structures, economic structures, political structures, financial structures, scientific, academic, educational structures, they're all based on the systems that have grown out of the energies and humanity's response to the energies of the past 2,000 years. So that whole conditioning weighs in on not being able to shift our view of life, our view of the world.
Okay, this is a perfect opportunity to talk about this a little bit, because we live in a three-dimensional world. We live in a world that demands we eat, that demands we are clothed, we have a place to live, things like that. What is it the Space Brothers were saying that would alter this concept?
What were they saying? Indeed. The interesting thing that I found is in Adamski, and you mentioned Adrian Beers, who wrote under the pseudonym of Stefan Denard, in his book that was originally published in English as Operation Survival Earth, which I thought was a very apt title. It was later republished by Wendell Stevens as A Contact from Planet Iaga.
Right.
And actually, there are quite a few hints and overt pointers in the accounts of other contactees towards a completely different way of organizing society. One that actually harks back or can be found even at the heart of every of the major world religions. If we look at the heart of the major world religions and also at what the Age of Wisdom calls the law of harmlessness, we find the command of treat others the way you yourself would want to be treated.
Exactly.
And we even find it in Article 25 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that everyone has the right, every man, woman, and child has the right to adequate food, housing, healthcare, and education. So it's nothing alien or foreign to the human heart. It is to do with fulfilling everyone's basic needs to live, to be able to live a normal life, a humane life.
Productive.
And lay the foundation for living a fulfilling life, so that people have the opportunity to think about themselves, the meaning of life, to look for a broader meaning in life, to come to the point where they may work towards self-awareness and self-realization. And it is this is so crucial to solving the current problems in the world, the problems of social inequality, the problems of environmental destruction, the problems of political tensions, because all the tensions that we see and all the divisions result from these inequalities and these tensions that come out of competition, having to compete for the necessities of life. We don't have to compete. The visitors from space have given ample examples of how life on their planets has been organized. And interestingly, in the late 1970s, there was a committee formed by former West German Chancellor Willy Brandt, the Brandt Committee, and they published a report in 1980 called North-South, a Program for Survival. And they already suggested a new international order where internationally the countries would make an inventory of what is needed, what each country produces, what it has in excess, and through, for instance, the United Nations agency, and with all the modern technology that we have nowadays with computers and communication and transportation modes, make sure that the problem of redistribution, because if there's hunger or if people die of preventable diseases, it's not a matter of a lack of food or a lack of medicines. It's a problem of distribution. The things that we have annually still now a food surplus per capita in the world of 10%. Most of the excess food is rotting in the storehouses in the world. So it's just a matter of humanity and giving expression to what we know to be true, namely that we are one human family. And this is what the visitors from space have been saying through their contactees in the 1950s and through all the other genuine contactees ever since. You are one human race. You are brothers and sisters of the same human family. So you have to make sure that everybody is given a chance to live a decent life and from there be in charge of their own destiny.
Now, a lot of the pushback that comes on that is, of course, I don't even know how to put it, but to many people, this sounds like a view of communism. And it's really not, because when you get into these old contactees, there is a point and purpose to everyone's ability and mission, basically, on life. If you're doing something on this planet that does not make you happy, does not fulfill you, you are not fulfilling who and what you are supposed to be, correct?
And you are not able to contribute to the whole,
Exactly.
to the greater good. And when people think of communism, they think of the rather failed experiment in the Soviet Union and their allies, where the notion of justice was enforced top down, and the notion of freedom was completely left out.
Right.
The notion of individual freedom. If you look at the way of reorganizing society as suggested by the space visitors and suggested by the masters of wisdom and the world teacher as their head, I might add the information coming from Benjamin Graham, whose name I haven't mentioned yet, but
Yes.
It's certainly out there with H.P. Blavatsky and Alice Bailey. They have all suggested that we do this not out of aiming for uniformity. On the contrary, they say that real unity can only result from celebrating diversity. But in order to have diversity, everybody needs to be given a chance to a decent life. And if we just compare humanity to a family, and I mean, nobody in their right mind would think of a family of 6 with only 2 taking as much as they can from the table of food, from the dinner table, and leaving the crumbs for the others. Right. Nobody in their right mind would do that. So what we need to do is recognize what we know. Most people, what most people know to be true in their hearts, that we are one human race. We all depend on the same planet for our survival, and all we need to do is put that realization into practice.
Very, very true. And that, I think, is one of the biggest things that gets missed from the early contactees and what they had to say. It's not about giving up the freedom of thought and the individuality. In fact, it's quite different. It's about allowing each of us to find that freedom of thought, which we somehow have learned not to take time for.
Exactly.
Yeah, unfortunately. We've gotten so busy in the insanity of everyday life, we've forgotten what to do with it. That our spiritual development is as important, because that's the only thing that'll get us out in the cosmos.
Yes, and it's even worse because our educational systems have been hijacked, one might say, by the forces of commercialization, market forces, and people are through our educational system are losing their originality, their uniqueness. Yes. We are forced into templates that suit the corporate view of the world, and if you don't fit in, you drop out and you don't count. And if you do fit in, you still have to compete for a job at the lowest possible salary. So it's really a shame that we have allowed this to happen. But there's every reason for hope, because we can see when we look at the world now. Sorry.
Let's talk about that. There's so many people out there that feel hopeless. Shirley doesn't even like the word hope because it has its own connotation of being hopeless. So what signs do you see that give us hope today?
The foremost sign today is the utter polarization that we see in the world at the moment. There has never been a time when the choice before humanity was clearer. Either we continue on in the old ways of competition and greed, creating greater conflict and chaos and eventual destruction, or more and more people are beginning to see that now because of the immense tensions in the world. We change course and we create justice and freedom through the principle of sharing the world's resources, the food, technology, the know-how, etc., in the world, and thereby create the necessary trust that will reduce the tensions and will allow the world to come together and people to celebrate life eventually. Now, there's never been a point in human history where this has been so clear. This is what in the book by Stefan den Aarde, he was even told by his extraterrestrial contacts that humanity needs this polarization in order to see this choice, to make this book. George Adamski, several other contactees, also in South America, were told this is the time where humanity has to choose. We have been trying to help as much as we can, but now it's up to you. You have to stand up. You have to make your voice heard for what you know to be true, what you hold dear. And if you hold your life dear and living on this planet, and you have to demand justice and freedom. So and if we look just in recent years, we have seen so many mass uprisings, whether it was the Arab Spring, whether it was the worldwide Occupy movement, whether it's the continuing mass demonstrations in South America. People are really ready. They've indicated time and again in the last 10 years even their readiness and unwillingness to continue to comply with the powers that be if it limits their expression. Because see, what we haven't discussed yet, and what several contactees have also hinted at, we are passing into a different age, a new age. The past 2,000 years, and this is an astronomical fact, the Earth and the solar system were under the influence of the energies from the constellation of Pisces. And they have created this civilization. Our response to those energies has created this civilization with its current structures, etc., that no longer work because now we are solidly under the influence of the energies of Aquarius. The solar system and the Earth with it has moved into a new alignment with this constellation of Aquarius. Massive, enormously strong cosmic energies from that constellation have been building up and streaming, flowing into our system, and that's the reason why the old structures are slowly crumbling and faster every day before our eyes, and because we haven't had the time yet to build new structures that will reflect our response to the new energies. They are not in place yet. So this is why this time is. It looks the world is really in turmoil. But at the same time, the polarization, as I said, enables humanity to see the choice before us.
Well, let me just ask you this. Do you think there will be more turmoil before people begin to awaken?
I think based on my studies, my research, my understanding of the information coming from Benjamin Graham, what we see and what is really holding humanity back at the moment is the entirely flawed economic system, where the basic necessities for the majority of people in this world are denied, and at the same time, the economic system, as it's run now, is run on. Well, it's actually running on empty, and it's a house of cards. It hasn't entirely crumbled yet. They've managed to hold up the facade, the appearance of business as usual, but behind the scenes, you hear more and more warnings of, high-standing, high-ranking experts, the director of the IMF, several directors of several central banks in Europe especially, who say that a new crisis is inevitable. And because the experts will tell you that nothing fundamentally has changed since the crisis of 2008, this time the collapse will be much more devastating, which means that life as we know it in terms of our economic system will come to an end. And I think we're very close to that point. And it will mean that life for people in Western countries, where we have this advanced infrastructure, where we generally don't worry about where to get our food because we get in our cars,
right,
or in Amsterdam on our bikes, and we go to the market and we get the food in supermarkets or the street markets and we get our food. For us, it will be a difficult period, which I don't know how long it will take. It depends also on our response to the crisis. Will people take to the streets right away and demand justice and freedom for everyone? But it will be a difficult period of time because the distribution centers will be down for a while, so that the supply chain will be disrupted, etc. But it will not be the end of the world. It will be the end of the world as we know it, but not the end of the world. People in I don't advocate that anybody goes hungry, but people in developing countries have been living in a world where not having money to buy food means that you never know where your next meal is going to come from. And many people have survived in circumstances like that for decades. Most people in Western countries, even though it will be a difficult time, will survive, but we will be forced to make that choice. So I think we are very close to that point.
And the choice will be exactly what?
The choice will be, do we want to go back to the old ways and continue our current system of competition and greed, or will we change course and start to share the riches and the wealth of the world, the abundance of the planet among all our brothers and sisters?
Okay.
And that requires putting into place new economic structures in a form of global governance that many people are frightened of, because they have these ideas of a one world order, etc. But again, oneness and expressing oneness is not the same as going into uniformity. On the contrary.
Right. No, I understand that. My question comes to the point that there are so many people out there that fear being controlled because they fear lack of freedom. How can one convey to them that this is not a lack of freedom? This is actually taking care of each other. This is being aware of others, because that has to change before the consciousness of people can hit a point that becomes true awareness for everyone. How do we do that?
Exactly. Well, in that sense, we are extremely fortunate that we are not alone. When at the start of the show, we talked about the evolution of consciousness, and I mentioned the spiritual kingdom that has evolved out of the human kingdom, and the members of this spiritual kingdom on our planet are have been returning into the everyday world, so far unbeknown to most people, but several have taken up their places in the world, are ready to step forward as soon as their leader, so to speak, our eldest brother on this planet, the world teacher. According to Benjamin Graham, his personal name is Maitreya. The Buddhists speak of Maitreya, the future Buddha, who was announced by Gautama Buddha, the fourth Buddha. And in fact, we see the same expectation for a new teacher or a return teacher in every major religion. And it is known in the Ageless Wisdom as the law of cyclic return, or the doctrine of the coming one. And the beginning of every new cosmic age, this great white brotherhood, the spiritual kingdom, sends out from their midst a teacher to reveal to mankind a new aspect of our divinity. It is not about teaching humanity about believing in God, but about reconnecting us with our own divinity, with our own divine nature, from which we will recognize that the other person is me.
Right.
And from which the empathy that you were just referring to will ensue. And this world teacher, Maitreya by name, according to Benjamin Graham, stands ready, has been ready since 1982 to present himself to the world in an extraordinary event that will have global coverage through television and radio and the internet. And that is the event that will trigger that shift in consciousness, in awareness, that will help humanity make the correct choice. And the masters, through Benjamin Graham, have said that they have every confidence that humanity will make the right choice.
Right.
And if I may, according to Benjamin Graham, this because it's such an extraordinary event that is upon us. He says that on the day of declaration, the day that the world teacher will declare his true status, he's been traveling around the world and giving interviews without revealing his true name and his true stature. But on the day that he will declare his true status and his true identity, he will establish a telepathic rapport with all members of humanity above the age of 14. Right. And because this will be a telepathic rapport, we will hear his words inwardly. So we will see his face on television or on the internet if we're watching, and we will hear his words, but we won't see his lips move, because he will give his message telepathically. So native English speakers will hear him in English, the Russians will hear him in Russian, and the Chinese in Chinese, and the French in French, etc., etc. And at the same time, as he gives his message, he will briefly describe, give a picture of humanity's high spiritual source, the source that we come from, and the material depths to which we have fallen, and the bright future that lies ahead of us. And at the same time, the energy of love, which is a divine aspect. It's not the sentimental love between people, but it's a cosmic energy that holds the universe together. And he embodies that energy on this planet. Hence, the fact that he holds this position of world teacher will stream out from him, and he has said that it will be as if he embraces all of humanity, and we will feel it as if it's an embrace so strong. And at the same time, also hundreds of thousands of spontaneous healings will take place. And according to Benjamin Graham, that is the way that we will know that this is really the world teacher, the Christ returned, the fifth Buddha, the 10th incarnation of Vishnu and the 12th Mahdi, etc., according to the various religions.
Right.
So that is where the trigger will come from for the shift in awareness. And interestingly, a few contactees have even pointed to such an event of a return teacher.
Mm-hmm.
So we keep seeing hints. Of course, it was not the role of the contactees, especially the 1950s contactees, to inform the world about the Masters of Wisdom and the return of the world teacher. But it was their role to expand humanity's consciousness with the notion that life is universal, exists all around us in the universe, and that the brothers and sisters from space are here in support of this momentous event.
Mm-hmm. But they are support. They're not here to save us, correct?
No, and they're not here to save us, to change, to solve anything for us. Once we decide to save ourselves,
right,
they will extend their help, even technologically, insofar as, I mean, they have already, through other means, given us new technology like touch screens and transistors, etc. That's been documented, but there's a new technology that has been developed already, is waiting to be given to us once we renounce war forever as a means of solving conflict. And it's called the technology of light, and it will be available for free, it will be safe, and it will be unlimited for domestic use, industrial use, and for transportation purposes. And the space visitors have been developing that here on our planet in cooperation with Earth scientists in both America and Russia. So all we need to do once this crisis has happened and humanity has been reintroduced to the idea of the evolution of consciousness by seeing the people, the men and women who have gone before us, who are now the Masters of Wisdom and the world teacher, and we have renounced war forever, for good, then this technology will be given to us, and it will help solve many, many problems, obviously.
How far away do you think that is? Where do you think we stand in our development?
We are standing right on this at this point, at this crossroads in our development. This is now, and now, of course, time is a difficult concept because we see it as a linear unfoldment of events, an analog or serial development of events. But in fact, time, according to the masters, doesn't exist. This could, if it depends on our readiness, it depends on our, it's hard to put into words. Obviously, once the outer circumstances create the environment in which people begin to suddenly think about, is this what life is all about? And once our securities, our certainties fall away because the collapse of the economic and financial systems, then I'm sure the world teacher will step forward. This is what Benjamin Graham has said, and this is what will be necessary if we are to prevent total chaos in the world.
Right.
I mean, it's quite obvious. There will be so much panic otherwise. And so, I personally, I've expected it. I've been expecting it since, a long time, but especially since 2008. And then the powers that be managed to prop up the systems and make it look as if it's business as usual. But when you hear so many expert voices saying this cannot go on any longer, starting in 2015, I'm not a financial expert or an economic expert, so I would find it hard to pinpoint. But if people have been saying that these expert people have been saying that for the last 2 years. I expected any minute, any moment.
Uh-huh. Wow. Okay. I think maybe some of our readers probably have not heard of Benjamin. Maybe you could give us a little background on him?
Yes, definitely. Benjamin Creme was actually an artist. He was born in 1922 and passed away in October 2016, so just over a year ago. He worked in the 1950s with the Space Brothers. He was actually giving talks, public talks on the banks of the Thames. He told me once about the spiritual mission of the Space Brothers. And in 1959, he was first contacted by the Master of Wisdom that he ended up working with for the rest of his life until his passing, and probably still after, since he has passed away. His master trained him for the mission that he started in 1974 after he had accepted the request from Maitreya, the world teacher, to present to the world the information about the return of Maitreya and the masters. Mm-hmm. And this started in earnest, this mission of informing the world in 1974 with a small group of people that he invited to his home in London. And that gradually grew and spread it. He was first invited to lecture in Holland, which he did. And since 1980, he was invited every year, sometimes for many years, multiple times per year, to give various lectures around the United States. He went to Japan every year, traveled around Europe. He's been the editor-in-chief of Share International magazine since its inception in 1982, and quite uniquely, every issue of the magazine, every month, well, there were 10 issues per year, 2 double issues. His master would dictate an article for publication in the magazine, which has given unique insights into not only current affairs, but also into rather unique concepts that we are still grappling with, like the oneness of life and karma, rebirth, a new age concept of time, and many, there's 2 volumes actually of articles that were written by the Master of Wisdom that have appeared in the magazine. Eventually his information has spread around the world to the point where there's groups of volunteers. There's not an organization that you can join. People can subscribe to the magazine, but there are groups of volunteers in many parts of the world, around the globe, that continue to give out this information. And there's also a website that people can find the background information and regular updates of the contents of the magazine.
It's quite a wonderful magazine. I've received it for years, and it is something that is thought-provoking, and it gives rise to many questions, which I think we have to be of a mind to question in order to learn. What were his thoughts on karma?
Well, his thoughts, I think, coincide with the teachings on karma, the Ageless Wisdom teaching on karma. Karma is actually nothing else, nothing more than the rebalancing in nature. When there's an action, there will naturally follow a reaction. So It's not retribution; it is the universe restoring its natural balance.
Right.
Our thoughts, our feelings, our words, our actions, all set into motion causes. And these causes have their effects, and the effects come back to us. What comes around goes around. And if the words and our actions and our thoughts and emotions were of a benign nature, it will come back to us in a benign nature. If they were in a hateful nature or a destructive nature, it will have a destructive impact on ourselves.
Right.
Sometimes very quickly, and we refer to that as instant karma, and sometimes only in a later life.
Yeah, I ask because so many people, for some reason, are trying to redefine karma these days. And I do think it's something worth taking a look at because it does seem to come back very quickly, much quicker than perhaps it did in years prior. But it's fascinating because I keep reading these articles all around the world that are talking about karma's gone, it's over, it's finished, and to me, it's just another part of the lesson. So we have
Absolutely.
to be open and aware of it. But I was curious what he thought of it for that reason, because so many people do.
Well, if people are interested in the fundamentals of the Age of Wisdom teaching on the Share International website, people can download for free a booklet, which is also available in print, but it's available for free to download, called The Age of Wisdom Teaching, an Introduction to Humanity's Spiritual Legacy.
Mm-hmm.
And it has a very clear elaboration of these concepts of karma and reincarnation and the general esoteric view of life.
Yeah. Which he was known as quite the esotericist. Benjamin was. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And really one of the sort of founders of a movement that took into the equation the spiritualness of the being, not just the physicalness of the being, which is so important.
What was so remarkable about his approach was that he managed to marry the concepts of spirituality and practicality, putting our spiritual awareness, our spiritual concept into practice. There's no point, if I put it in my own words, but that's really also what Share International, the magazine, is about. There's no point in being aware of being one as a human race if we don't put it into practice.
Yeah, if we don't act on it. Right.
Yes. And that's also why Article 25 in the Declaration of Human Rights about the adequate food and housing and healthcare and education for every man, woman, and child is the guiding principle of the magazine, and it's in the colophon for every issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so
very, very
quite
important.
unique. Quite unique that he managed to make spirituality so practical.
Yes. Yeah, well, that's a great way to put it, because do you think that part of the problem with our development as humans is the fact we don't seem to have, or when we do have, take the time to really work on things through meditation, through inner dialogue with the divine, with recognition of our own individual spirituality? Is that part of the problem, Gerard, that we don't really open our arms to taking that time just to get quiet and still and be at peace with self and the universe?
Well, I would say yes, but at the same time, we shouldn't forget how difficult it is in today's world to do that.
Yeah.
And also, of course, in today's world, we are supplied with so many distractions, and we are so ready to run after these distractions. You know, there's not a moment with our modern computers and technology and mobile phones that we do not receive a notification, an update from somebody, sometimes, on the other side of the world, about what they are doing at that moment in time, even if it's very trivial. So,
right.
yes, on the one hand, on the one hand, we have this responsibility, our own responsibility of allowing ourselves to be distracted. And on the other hand, I understand the need for distraction when you are under so much pressure just to make a living.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very true.
And I think the people who have managed to see the value of self-awareness and turning inwardly to find out more about their true nature, and manage to keep a balance in that sense through meditation. Benjamin Graham, at the instruction of his master, introduced type of meditation for busy people, as they called it. It's called transmission meditation. To allow people to be of service, because that is what it is, of course. We need to, putting spirituality into practice means that you serve the greater good, whether it's by helping your neighbor, whether it's by joining a volunteer organization, or donating money, or giving your time to a good cause. We have to give expression to our own inner values. That's what life really is about.
Well, I think that is so important, and it is a part of who we need to be, because we gather so much from doing that as individuals. It's, I don't know, a part of growth for self if we allow it to, but we have to take a slightly different approach than what we have been, because there is being selfish and there is being of service, and there is a balance between the two.
You have to look after yourself in order to be able to serve.
That's right.
To serve others. Yeah, there has to be a balance. You can't do one without the other.
Right. And we have to learn that is possible. It's something that is doable by all of us. Gosh, our time has sailed by, but I have got to thank you, because I think we just scratched the surface, and maybe we can get you back and continue this dialogue at some point. What are you doing next for yourself? Are you out lecturing? Are you working on another book?
I'm not working on a book. I've just finished writing an article for Share International magazine, and it will be in the January-February issue, about 3 laws that will see us through this crisis: the law of cyclic return, the return of a teacher, the law of evolution, humanity expanding its consciousness, and the law of harmlessness, the need to express our expanded consciousness in practice, in practical solutions for humanity in the world, with quotations from 5 major religions relating to all of these 3 laws. I'm not working on a book at the moment. I'll be lecturing in Paris in March and in Finland in July, and some other events may turn up in the meantime.
Are you coming back to the States soon?
When I'm invited, I will always try to honor the invitation. At the moment, I have no invitations running from the States. I was invited in 2015 for the Star Works USA conference organized by Paula Harris.
Yes, yes.
And at the moment, there's no invitations standing from the US, but anybody who invites me, I'll try to fit it into my schedule.
Oh, perfect. Well, Gerard, thank you so much. This has really been a pleasure. I've enjoyed it tremendously. I think our listeners probably have too, because they've heard things they haven't heard in either a long time or possibly forever. So we'll keep in touch.
Yes, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak about this.
Oh, absolutely. And thank you so much for joining us and all of your research. It's something we really shouldn't lose, because there's so much more to the contactee story than what many people are aware of. And you
Absolutely. And if I may just add, in my book Priorities for a Planet in Transition, it's mind-blowing what the contactees have shared in terms of the solutions to the current crisis in the world.
Right. Yeah. Well, we didn't even get into that, and we could be there for a long time just covering that.
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, and stay in touch.
Thank you again.
Let me know what you're doing. And if you get to the States, hopefully we'll have an opportunity to meet.
That would be great. Yes. Thank you again, Britt.
Okay. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Everyone tonight, when you're spending that special quiet time with self-centering, ask yourself what role you play in the universe, what role you play with people you know and have yet to meet, and what you can do to better the world we live in. Thank you. Good night. Have an incredible week. Bye.